During Grandma Beatrice's will reading, my cousin Zoe rose from her chair and extended a perfectly manicured finger straight at my face. She doesn't deserve a penny. Every head around the long mahogany table dipped in agreement. Their expressions carried that tight, satisfied look people wear when they believe justice is finally being served, when they think the verdict is inevitable and the accused has already been erased. In their minds, this was my conclusion, my exposure, my fall. Then Mr. Sterling, the estate attorney, formed a thin, razor-edged smile. He shifted his gaze from Zoe to my Uncle Gregory and spoke 7 words that rearranged the oxygen in the room. Actually, she left everything to the one who helped her catch the thief in this family. The words didn't land immediately, they hovered. Then he reached into his briefcase, removed a laptop, and connected it to the library's central display. A file appeared on the screen, security footage. He clicked. The room fell silent. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'd love to know who's part of this community. To understand the suffocating quiet that settled over the library, you have to understand the noise of the previous 3 years. While Zoe was busy filtering her life into curated perfection in Milan, and Uncle Gregory was torching venture capital on one doomed tech startup after another, I was here, every weekend. For 36 consecutive months, I wasn't sipping tea or engaging in sentimental nostalgia. I was working. Grandma Beatrice wasn't merely a grandmother, she was a historian, a preservationist. A woman who understood that memory is currency and that legacy requires maintenance. Her library wasn't decorative. It was a carefully assembled collection of rare manuscripts and first editions appraised at over $1.2 million, and it was disorganized, so I became its archivist. I approached my time with her like a formal engagement. The payment wasn't financial, it was mutual respect. I wore white cotton gloves. I constructed a digital catalog from nothing. I recorded provenance, structural condition, restoration needs, insurance classifications, and market valuations for every artifact inside that brownstone. I could distinguish between humidity warping and chemical degradation. I knew which bindings required reinforcement and which volumes needed precise climate calibration. To Zoe and Gregory, the room represented liquidity. To me, it was a citadel of history in need of defense. They resented me for that. For a long time, I misunderstood the resentment. I assumed they believed I was currying favor, positioning myself for inheritance, performing loyalty. Standing there while Zoe shouted about a fabricated black market ledger, I understood the truth. It wasn't jealousy, it was narcissistic injury. They didn't despise me because I was malicious. They despised me because I was evidence. My quiet, consistent work was a relentless reflection of their absence. Each book I cataloged highlighted their neglect. Each restoration underscored their impatience to liquidate. My diligence illuminated their opportunism. Competence in the presence of entitlement feels like accusation, and people like Zoe and Gregory cannot endure feeling diminished. When confronted with a mirror they dislike, they don't adjust themselves. They shatter the mirror. That's why they framed me. Removing me from the house wasn't enough. They needed reputational annihilation. If they could transform the archivist into a thief, then their greed would seem justified. If I became fraudulent, their abandonment became irrelevant. They engineered the lie. They planted a counterfeit ledger in my bag. They orchestrated this spectacle to soothe wounded egos. As Zoe continued her performance, breath ragged with feigned indignation, I felt no panic, only clarity. For 3 years I had cataloged the past, yet I failed to record the most critical entry. While I was preserving history, my family was decaying. Grandma Beatrice, however, had seen everything. She had been observing quietly, and she prepared one final record for the archives that none of them anticipated. Panic is reserved for those without preparation. I remained motionless, fingertips resting lightly against the polished edge of the table, treating Zoe's outburst like irrelevant background noise. I met Mr. Sterling's eyes. He returned the look, impassive, professional. Then came the faintest nod. It was time. He didn't interrupt Zoe. He allowed her to exhaust herself with declarations about morality and betrayal while he calmly navigated folders on the display screen. A directory appeared. The sting, he double-clicked. The footage filled the monitor, not grainy or distorted, but sharp, high-definition clarity with pristine audio. The timestamp read 3 weeks prior. The setting was unmistakable, this very library. The subjects, Zoe and Uncle Gregory. They were crouched beside my work bag near the entrance, unaware of the concealed lens capturing every movement. Gregory glanced around repeatedly, perspiration beating at his temples. Zoe removed a leather-bound ledger from her tote and slipped it into my side pocket. "Hurry," Gregory whispered in the recording. "If she walks in, this falls apart." "Relax," Zoe replied with a sneer identical to the one frozen on her face now. "The little mouse is buried in maps. She won't notice. Once the police find it, she's finished. Then we can finally liquidate this dusty museum." I already secured a buyer for the first editions. The library grew so quiet that the hum of the laptop's drive sounded amplified. They laughed, not nervously, triumphantly. They sealed my bag, exchanged a congratulatory high five, and exited the frame. Zoe stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The color drained from her skin, leaving her makeup stark and artificial. She looked at me, then back at the footage, desperation tightening her features. "That's fake," she shrieked, "a deep fake. You altered it. Grandma was senile. She couldn't manage security systems. You manipulated her." I almost smiled. She still misunderstood. She thought this was about technical sophistication. It was about character. She imagined she was battling digital trickery. She was confronting a woman who had dedicated her life to studying the past in order to safeguard the future. History, after all, is preserved by those who anticipate betrayal. Mr. Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He snapped the laptop shut. The sound cut through the room like a blade. It echoed against high ceilings and rebounded off shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. Zoe flinched. Gregory's gaze darted toward the exit, calculating. "Let us set the video aside, Mr. Sterling said evenly. He opened a printed file on the table. "Instead, let us review the inventory. Specifically, the first edition of The Great Gatsby and the 17th century Celestial Atlas removed from this library 3 weeks ago. The items sold to a private buyer in New York for $42,000. We didn't sell anything," Gregory blurted. "We were protecting assets." "Protecting assets," Sterling repeated calmly. "Is that what one calls a cash exchange in a hotel lobby with an unregistered purchaser?" Because the wire transfer documentation indicates the funds were deposited not into the estate trust, but into a newly created offshore account registered under Zhou Chen Enterprises. Zoe's composure fractured. "So what?" she snapped. "It's our inheritance. We took an advance. Grandma was hoarding wealth while I struggled building my brand." "Those books were wasting away." "Wasting away," Sterling echoed, a faint trace of amusement surfacing. He glanced at me knowingly before returning his attention to Zoe. "Your grandmother was not senile, she was observant. She noticed missing volumes months ago. She recognized her legacy was being quietly cannibalized." He withdrew another document, an invoice bearing the header of a London printing specialist. "6 months ago, she commissioned a master reproduction expert. 12 of the most valuable works were replicated in museum-quality facsimile. The copies were placed on the shelves. The originals were relocated to a secured, climate-controlled vault in Zurich. The silence that followed pressed down like weight. Gregory's face drained completely. Zoe's head shook in denial. "No," she whispered, "that's impossible. The buyer authenticated them." The buyer, Sterling said with measured precision, was not a collector. He was a private investigator retained by this firm. He wasn't checking the bindings for authenticity. Zoe, he was checking them to see if you were foolish enough to sell them. Music, and you were. I looked at the empty shelves where the stolen books had been. My grandmother hadn't just protected her assets, she had weaponized them. She had turned their greed into the very instrument of their destruction. They hadn't stolen a fortune. They had stolen paper and ink worth less than a few hundred. But in doing so, they had sold their souls for a price that didn't even exist. It wasn't just a trap, it was a masterclass in human nature. Beatrix knew they couldn't resist the bait. She knew they would never bother to open the books and read them. They only cared about the cover. Music, and that shallowness had just cost them everything. The room didn't just feel silent anymore. It felt heavy, as if the air pressure had dropped before a storm. Zoe had stopped screaming. She was slumped against the bookshelf, staring at the floor, her mind likely racing through every interaction she had ever had with Grandma Beatrice, trying to pinpoint the moment she had been made. Uncle Gregory looked like a man who had just watched his own execution, but Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. Beatrice left this, he said, his voice softer now, lacking the sharp edge of the legal proceedings. She asked me to read it only if the trap was sprung. She was very specific about that condition. She said, if the books remain on the shelves, burn this letter. If they are gone, read it to the family. He broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet room. He unfolded the letter, smoothing the crease with a reverence that told me he had loved her too. My family, Sterling read, speaking with a cadence that sounded hauntingly like my grandmother. If you are hearing this, it means you have failed. It means that given the choice between preserving our history and selling it for parts, you chose the sale. I am writing this with a broken heart, not a vengeful one. For the last year I have watched you. I watched you look at my library and see only dollar signs. I watched you look at your cousin Savannah and see only an obstacle. I felt tears prick my eyes. She had seen everything. All those weekends when I thought she was napping in her chair, she had been observing the dynamic, the cruelty, the greed. I did not set this trap to catch you, the letter continued. I set it hoping it would remain empty. I commissioned the facsimiles and left them out in the open, not as bait, but as a final mercy. I wanted to give you one last chance to walk into this room, see something valuable, and choose to leave it be. I prayed every night that Mr. Sterling would never have to open this file. I prayed that my suspicions were just the paranoia of an old woman, but I am a historian. I deal in facts, not wishes. And the fact is, you have looked at this family not as a legacy to protect, but as a carcass to feast upon. Zoe let out a small, choked sob. It wasn't an apology. It was the sound of a child realizing the parent they thought they had fooled had actually been watching them the entire time. I cannot leave my life's work to vultures, Sterling read, his eyes meeting Gregor's. I cannot entrust the past to people who have no concept of the future. The library, the estate, and the trust are not rewards for sharing my DNA. They are tools for preservation. Therefore, if the books are gone, so is your inheritance. You have sold your birthright for $42,000. I hope it was enough. Sterling lowered the letter. There is a postscript, he added, turning to me. To Savannah, my silent watchman, I am sorry I could not protect you from their nature, but I could protect you from their schemes. You never asked for anything, yet you gave me everything. You are the only one who understood that the true value of a book is not the price on the cover, but the words inside. Do not let them make you feel guilty for their sins. You were the only one who passed the test because you were the only one who didn't know you were taking it. I leaned back against the heavy oak table, the wood cool against my palms. It wasn't a victory lap, it was a tragedy. This entire time, while Zoe and Gregory were plotting and scheming, treating Grandma like a senile obstacle, she had been agonizing over this decision. She hadn't wanted to cut them off. She had given them a physical test of character, a literal object lesson, hoping against hope that they would prove her wrong. This trap wasn't born of malice. It was born of a grandmother's grief. She had given them the rope, praying they wouldn't use it to hang themselves, but they had tightened the noose with their own hands. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a horrifying click. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, his tone shifting from mournful to official. Now we must address the legal ramifications. You see, the sale of the facsimiles is not a simple misunderstanding. It is a felony. Zoe looked up, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. But they were fakes, she cried, grasping at straws. We didn't actually steal anything valuable. You said so yourself, it was just paper. Intent, Miss Chen, Sterling said, leaning forward. The law cares about intent. You entered this house with the intent to steal property you believed to be worth over $40,000. You engaged in a transaction to sell that property. You accepted money for it. That is attempted grand larceny and fraud. The fact that the items were fake only means you defrauded the buyer as well as the estate. But the buyer was you, Gregory argued, his voice rising in panic. You hired him. It was a setup. Entrapment applies to law enforcement. Mr. Chen, Sterling corrected him coolly. I am a private attorney executing the wishes of a private citizen, and the police officers waiting in the foyer are very interested in the wire fraud aspect of your little transaction. Crossing state lines to sell stolen goods, that makes it federal. Zoe's composure shattered completely. She dropped to her knees, not metaphorically, but literally she crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my dress. Savannah, please, you can't let them arrest us. We're family, I'm your cousin. We grew up together, tell him to stop. Tell him it was just a mistake. I looked down at her. This was the girl who had spent the last decade making fun of my clothes, my job, my quiet life. This was the girl who had just tried to frame me for a crime I didn't commit. And now, stripped of her filters and her followers, she was just a terrified child who had finally been told no family. I asked, my voice trembling slightly, "You didn't treat me like family when you planted that ledger in my bag. You didn't treat me like family when you stood up in front of everyone and called me a thief. You were ready to send me to prison, Zoe. You were ready to ruin my entire life just to buy a few more handbags." Uncle Gregory stepped forward, trying to use his size to intimidate, but he just looked deflated. "Savannah, be reasonable. Think about the scandal. Think about the family name. Your grandmother wouldn't want us in jail." "My grandmother," I said, feeling a surge of strength I didn't know I had, "left me a letter specifically telling me not to let you guilt me. She knew exactly who you were. She gave you a choice, Gregory. You chose the money. Now you have to pay the bill." I turned to Mr. Sterling. The power in the room had shifted completely. It wasn't with the loud, flashy influencers anymore. It was with the quiet girl who knew where the bodies were buried, or in this case, where the books were shelved. Uncle Gregory looked from Mr. Sterling to me, his face a map of calculation and regret. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. Then he tried the only move he had left. He tried to bargain. "Look, we can fix this," he said, his voice wheedling, the desperation bleeding through. "Savannah, think about what you're doing. We're your only family. Beatrice is gone. If you send us to prison, you'll be completely alone. Who's going to help you manage the estate? Who's going to be there for holidays? We made a mistake." "Okay, a huge mistake, but we can pay back the 42,000. Zoe has connections. I have prospects. Just tell Sterling to drop it. Well, sign whatever you want. Well, walk away from the inheritance. Just don't let them arrest us." He was using the oldest weapon in the family arsenal, fear of isolation. He was banking on the fact that I had always been the quiet one, the one who craved connection, the one who tolerated their abuse just to have a seat at the table. He thought the threat of being an orphan was enough to make me fold. I studied his face, cataloging the sweat on his brow and the tremor in his hands. Then my attention shifted to the empty leather chair near the fireplace. The leather was worn in the shape of a person who had spent decades reading, thinking, and planning. Beatrice hadn't left me alone. She had left me surrounded by the greatest minds in history. She had left me a purpose, and in that empty chair I saw the ghost of her strength. She hadn't hesitated to set this trap because she knew that protecting the future sometimes meant amputating the past. I realized then that family wasn't about who you shared blood with. It was about who you shared values with. They were parasites, feeding off the host until there was nothing left. If I let them go, they would just find another host. They would drain someone else dry. Protecting the archive meant removing the threat permanently. I turned back to Mr. Sterling. The air in the room was electric, poised on the edge of a precipice. Gregory was holding his breath. Zoe was sobbing quietly into her hands. They were waiting for me to be the nice girl, the quiet girl, the girl who fixed things. "Proceed as instructed," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was cold, final, and absolute. Mr. Sterling nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He pressed a button on his phone. The heavy oak doors of the library swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a plainclothes detective. They didn't need to ask who the suspects were. The guilt was written on Zoe and Gregory's faces in sweat and tears. "Gregory Chen, Zoe Chen," the detective said, stepping forward with handcuffs already in hand. "You are under arrest for fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Zoe screamed as they pulled her up, a raw animal sound of disbelief. Gregory just slumped, defeated, letting them lead him away without a fight. They were marched out of the library, past the shelves they had tried to rob, past the history they had tried to sell. I stood there and watched them go. I didn't look away. I watched until the heavy front door closed behind them with a definitive thud, sealing the silence back into the house. I was alone in the library, just me, Mr. Sterling, and 1,000 stories watching from the walls. But for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The brownstone doesn't smell like stagnation and secrets anymore. Today it smells like bookbinder's glue, fresh coffee, and the specific dusty warmth of old paper being turned by new hands. It has been 6 months since the police escorted my family out of this foyer, and in that time I haven't just renovated a house, I have rebuilt a legacy. The bronze plaque outside now reads the Beatrice and Savannah Archive. It is open to the public 3 days a week. Right now, I am standing at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where Mr. Sterling read the will, teaching a workshop on restoration to 12 students who look at these books with the same reverence I do. Zoe and Gregory are currently awaiting trial. I hear through the grapevine that they are blaming each other, cannibalizing their own relationship in a desperate bid for a plea deal. I don't follow the news. I don't check their social media. I don't visit them. Their chaos is no longer my inheritance. People often think that revenge is about destruction. They think it is about burning down the enemy's house, salting the earth, and standing atop the ash heap. But as I watch a young student carefully repair the spine of a 19th century botanical guide, I realize that view is too small. Destruction is easy. Any fool with a match can burn a library. True revenge is construction. It is taking the very thing they wanted to liquidate for quick cash and turning it into a fortress that they can never touch. It is using the $3.36 million not to buy status symbols that rust and fade, but to endow a foundation that will outlive us all. My success is the ultimate verdict on their failure. Every book I save is a testament to the fact that they were wrong. Every student I teach is a guarantee that their greedy, short-sighted worldview dies with them. Grandma Beatrice knew this. That is why she left me the work, not just the reward. She knew that the only way to truly defeat a parasite is to make the host so strong, so vibrant, and so purposeful that there is no room left for the infection to take hold. I walk over to the empty leather chair by the fireplace. It isn't empty anymore. It is occupied by a stack of restored manuscripts waiting to be cataloged. I run my hand along the leather. I don't need to speak to her to know she is here. She is in the quiet hum of the climate control system. She is in the sunlight hitting the spine of the Gatsby First Edition, safe behind UV-protected glass. She is in the peace that has finally settled over this house. I didn't just inherit a fortune. I inherited a duty, and looking around at the life I have built from the ashes of their betrayal, I know I have finally balanced the ledger. If you believe that integrity is the only legacy worth leaving, hit that like button and share this story. And tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable thing you've ever preserved?